textile manufacturers. And it's a problem that they are really struggling with, even though they're setting very aggressive targets towards environmental sustainability. The key issue is that textiles wastewater is a very complex and concentrated mix of many different types of contaminants. And with traditional wastewater treatment technologies, each of these different classes of contaminants, such as salts, minerals, organics, dyes, and microfibers, require a different method to remove or decontaminate them. So I'm Deepak Mahato, of course, and thank you all for joining. What I'd like to describe to you today is a little bit about how we've taken this idea about a novel way to treat wastewater to hopefully further it along to where we can have a real world impact, delivering environmental and economic benefits to our industry. And so I'm going to focus a little less today on the technicals of how the actual technology works, and more on how we got here and some particulars about how we got this pilot going with Fashion for Good and partners. So I started this just generally. I wanted to give a little more background on our story and how we got here, because I think we may have some very early innovators here also. But this was my first startup, and it started with an idea, as you saw. Just some of you might recognize this device. This is called a humidifier, and what it does is when the air gets very hot and dry in the house, we use this thing to get more humidity. And I was just sitting at home one day watching this thing, and I had this idea about how to purify water, based on turning water into an aerosol and extracting the contaminants. And so I kept talking about this around the house, and my wife said that I had to do something about it or shut up. And so I had to figure out couldn't shut up. So I had to figure out how to get it off the ground as a startup. And so here we go. So this was my first startup, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So I got advice from as many different places as I could. Some of it made sense to me, some of it didn't. But this statement, I love this. This has been kind of my guiding principle pretty much the whole way. And it's actually just a very simple definition of a startup, but it's very interesting. So this is by a fellow named Steve Blank. I highly recommend his work, but everyone's got something different that works for them. But a startup, he says, is a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business plan. I love this because everything about it, describes, really captures all of the elements that it takes to get a startup off the ground. And so within that, I wanted to just touch on a few, the 4 key elements that seem, pretty important. There's more, but the idea, product, team, and execution. And the key aspect to me here that really helped me to understand what it would take to get this off the ground is that a startup is a temporary organization, which means you have to be flexible, adaptable. You're designed to search, to understand, and learn about the technology, the business, finding everything. We're searching, learning, researching, and then have this ultimate goal of a repeatable and scalable business plan. So once you have that, then I think that you're no longer a startup and you're an actual scaling business. And so there's some of the ways that I interpret this statement, but I wanted to walk through a little bit about how we're looking at these different elements along the way as a temporary organization. So first of all, a little bit about my background. I am a scientist, and I worked in industrial research in industrial agriculture for large companies for quite some time, and I developed a fair amount of experience managing intellectual property. And so that's really one of the first things that I did once I had this idea and got some initial proof of concept that it would work, is I started filing the patents around this. And this did a couple of things. by doing this early allowed us to, first of all, the US patent issued in 2018, and we've been working on extending that IP globally and with different designs and technologies since then. And so we have a pretty strong foundation, but which is great. The other thing that this allowed me to do is actually talk to people. And that's really important to get out there, share the idea, actually share the idea and the technology, because otherwise you can't really dive into how this could be a viable solution for anybody. And so this was our approach to being able to get out into the real world as quickly as we could. Then just getting the technology actually in front of people, trying it in different industries. So obviously we're focused on apparel and textiles now. Oil and gas was one of the first ones we did, and here's some wastewater from one of our first pilots that we did in the oil and gas industry, taking that wastewater and in one step through our process, reducing it to a pure mineral solid. And we looked at other industries as well, and thankfully we found apparel and textiles because it's fun, and they have actual funding. And so we evolved the product or the technology, starting out with little homemade prototypes from the garage, working our way up to the device, which we actually tested down in Texas, and then further improving over years. So as you can see, the year and code name when we developed these devices, that it took us to develop this equipment to the point where we had a system that was energy efficient and capable enough and had the right throughput to get into a pilot with apparel and textile manufacturers. A startup is a temporary organization. And so not only did we evolve the technology, the business idea, the product, the focus, but the team itself changed a lot over those years. And this is daunting and complex to how to bring a technology or what happens to a startup. But knowing that the founding team and recognizing that the founding team really takes different skills than the team that you might need for a pilot, or the team that you might need for to pursue different markets as you explore different ways to get your solution to the world, is important. It might not be the same. And we've all been very lucky. And so this is my current team, and the team also very much includes supporting some of the best in the world, including Fashion for Good, of course. So we've been at it for about we're in year 6 now with Fashion for Good, and so that's just a little background around how we got to the point where we are now. And so what are we doing here with Fashion for Good and what we've done over the last couple of years? The stage where we're at, so we still don't quite have this repeatable and scalable business model. But what we've been trying to do is obviously to get there and get as close as me. The pilot, another big step model in putting these 4 elements together. This time with an actual customer or set of customers that's willing to try it out. So in our laboratory, we're based in North Carolina in the US, which is pretty close to Wrangler's pilot production facility. And so when VF and Wrangler heard about our idea, I was fortunate enough to get them to invest in trying wastewater. And so we took a few tons of wastewater from their pilot facility, into our lab and ran it through the system, and apparel wastewater. This is actually from a denim laundry. And with this initial data, we were able to make some additional contacts and then got accepted to the Fashion for Good scaling program. Part of the focus of our acceptance directly to the scaling program was had to do with the stage of the company at the time, or the startup, and frankly convincing them that we were ready for a field pilot trial. And so we kind of came up with this progression of how this should go. First, to establish, I think this slide was actually from my pitch to entry to the scaling program. And so the idea was first to establish trial group participants. So there's quite a few partners that actually the Fashion for Good partner number has grown since then, but there was maybe 5 or 6 partners, I think, at the time. So which one of those are going to participate in the trial? Everyone has a different business, different needs, different priorities for sustainability and economics, and so trying to figure out which ones are the best fit with what we have to offer. Where are we going to do this? How are we going to do this trial? And so there's a lot of planning involved, and then execute and deliver the results. So this is what I came in with. And apparently they thought this was a good idea. So the next step is to actually pitch. A lot of pitching involved with Fashion for Good, or getting any startup off the ground, of course, which is selling or getting folks to buy into your idea, the potential of what we have to offer and the value, and actually buying into it, or accepting and investing their time, commitment, money, resources to showing that what you have to offer. So the initial pitch was to the partners was pretty high level around the idea or the concept. And the reason for that is because, well, a number of reasons. No one's ever done anything like this before with a technology like this. And so the actual value is unclear. And part of doing the pilot is to explore that value, figure out what it is together. But I mean, they're not going to buy into it unless there's some potential. And so I just kind of sold everything and promised the world, let's eliminate chemicals, eliminate effluent microplastics, just whatever I could throw up there, and get to sustainable manufacturing. Obviously, we could do all of this, but that's where I started. These guys are pretty sharp, so not everyone bought into the pilot, and you know, but some of them did, fortunately. And so the ones that ultimately agreed to explore this opportunity further were Bestseller, CNA, and PVH, and very importantly, Arvind and Envisol, which actually joined Fashion for Good as Sea Change did, I think. And so with these partners, at least initially on board, the goal then became to kind of design a real trial, how to get the device into the field. The nice thing about having Arvind and their subdivision, Envisol, on board is that this is an actual manufacturing supplier for these 3 partners. And so part of putting together a strong trial is to have good understanding of the relationships between the brands, the suppliers, the stakeholders, which certainly Fashion for Good is a key stakeholder here. To understand the relationships, what these folks have in common, and how to make a win-win relationship where everyone gets value from the process. And the other thing here to note, these are not faceless organizations. and understanding and developing relationships with the people involved, knowing them, building trust, and keeping communication open is absolutely critical, as you'll see. So the project team is what this becomes. And with a pilot like SeaChange, I think that we all have very different technologies because we're all innovators, of course. And this was really important, just to bring people together regularly as a project team to really get them engaged. And I feel like this is one of the things that we actually did right, led particularly by Fashion for Good. And thank you, Emily and Rohir. Rohir, yes, I'm not sure if Rohir is on. But they were amazing at helping to coordinate communication among the partners, and just keeping everyone engaged. So as far as actually designing the pilot, the first thing we had to figure out is what we're going to do. So that initial view, a high-level view of solving all of the world's problems, obviously we couldn't do that. And so I worked very closely with one of the partners, in particular with Envisol and Mihir at Envisol, who had the deepest understanding of operations because they were actually operating the wastewater treatment plant at Arvind's facility in Gujarat. And so what we did is come up with a technical work plan based on the performance of our system and the potential areas where we could add value in their wastewater treatment process and at their facilities, to come up with very specific technical goals, and this is actually a map of a generic wastewater treatment facility, kind of where potential areas where the SeaChange process could fit in to add value. Then mapping out exactly how this would go, how we would run the test. And so what we planned for originally was a 1-month trial of the SeaChange prototype equipment. Mapped out a very specific experiments that would be done with each wastewater stream, what the metrics were that we would be measuring for each of those, including generally focused on environmental sustainability metrics, and money. Could we actually save them money? Projected operating costs for commercial operation as we scaled up, and other things like regulatory and operational impact and the potential of other applications. So then working on the execution, when and how could we do this? In as much detail as we could. And so you can tell that I'm only touching on a few key aspects of this, but just to give you an idea, I can't share the actual proposal because that's confidential, but the proposal itself for this trial ended up being maybe 30 pages or something. And so there's a tremendous amount of detail that goes into trying a technology like this, or something new, introducing something new to the supply chain. And of course, the budget. This is a pretty complex trial, and it ended up taking a lot longer than it was supposed to, which I'll get into the details of that. But mapping out in very fine detail, or as fine detail as we could, the different phases and involvement of the trial, and in the involvement of each of the partners and people, and their roles. So this is just the budget, but each person on that project team plays an important role. It's important to keep them engaged because they have a lot to offer. The actual breakdown, obviously I didn't include that here, but the important thing that I want to point out here is that, without breaking down the specifics right now, is that SeaChange actually contributed a lot here, and Fashion for Good and the partners. But as you consider launching a pilot and engaging partners to take the time and the risk of just trying out your technology, you've got to have some skin in the game. And it's because if you're not investing in yourself, well, why would anyone else? So, and really the value that as a startup that you get from running a trial like this is tremendous from having this opportunity. So invest in it. It's important. Okay. Also, to help keep partners engaged, you have to bring them along the entire journey. And part of the way that we did this, communication is constant, but we did have a bi-weekly project team update, which was very highly structured. I should say that I don't know, we all come from different backgrounds, but all of these organizations and the partner companies are very large multinational corporations. And so I don't know if you don't have that experience of working in a large company, you might not be accustomed to the kind of structure that they have, but they like a lot of structure. And so the more of that you can bring, the easier it will be for them to stay engaged. They need information well organized. They just are busy and don't have a lot of time, and that's probably even more challenging since they're facing a lot of challenge with this the current global economic situation. But keep things organized, keep them engaged and involved. I did notice a question pop up, and I really appreciate that. And I will try to address those when we keep them coming. Definitely, we'll get to those as we get to the end of we'll have plenty of time after the presentation. Okay, so with all those details worked out, then I thought, okay, this is going to be awesome. This is going to work. So we got our equipment on a truck in a container and shipped it off to India to get the job done. And unfortunately, everything that I could imagine going wrong went wrong. This is just getting around was a challenge. This is one of my best friends in India. He was my tuk-tuk driver who I met outside of our hotel. And this is us changing a tire, which happened regularly. But we had to, just get to the factory somehow from the hotel and keep things running. And the infrastructure just wasn't quite what I was used to. And so I had to learn a lot about the operation there, just getting around, getting our equipment there. I don't know how many of you guys have an industrial equipment startup, but our equipment weighs about 3 tons. And so just moving it around is a challenge. The equipment was actually significantly damaged during the shipment itself, which caused a lot of issues. So there's a lot of issues with the execution. One of the things that really helped us get through this, I don't think anyone's trial could go more wrong than ours did. But my point here is just to recognize that things will go wrong. It might not be a disaster, and ours wasn't. We recovered, but the important thing is to maintain those communications. Keep your team engaged, keep the partners engaged, keep them informed so that everyone just knows what is going on. And when things don't, that way, when things don't go well, everyone's on the same page and they can help or at least understand. So what happened, I'm not going to get into all the details of what went wrong, but whoops, sorry. Some of my slides are on automatic, but the timelines got pushed out. And so we were able to hit the same endpoint, but the original trial operations got pushed out. What that did is add tremendous expense and difficulty because the trial was happening in India, and I'm not based in India. And so there was a lot more travel involved. There was a lot more logistics. There was shipping parts for repairs and equipment and modifications. And there was a lot more budget involved. And so that was all very challenging. But we did get through that, and ultimately were able to address the key criteria that we set out to around technical feasibility, economic feasibility, and finally, of course, sustainability metrics. This was not the only trial that we were running, and I think that's also really, really important, to have multiple shots on goal. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, because though we were able to complete the trial with Arvind, that was not, we didn't hit all the metrics. And so because we had multiple shots, we were able to find a market where we do have a good point for entry, where we can deliver all three of these things. So kind of the next steps for where we are is to take what we learned, and again, to move closer to a repeatable and scalable business model, to take what we learned and prepare for our actual first, what we hope to be our first commercial installation. And so what we learned is that we need to develop, before we go into an environment, we need to have a deep understanding of the supplier's operations and the environment where we're going. So, you know, what are their actual cost structures, their environmental regulations, and how can we be confident that we can hit all of their needs while still doing it in a way that we can support our business. Once we do that, actually install our, determine what metrics we can hit and tell them, because we know now what we can do in the field, and show them a proposal that says, this is how much it's going to take to operate our equipment, this is how much money you're going to save, and this is how much we're going to charge you. And then run our equipment for a month to actually demonstrate those performance metrics. And once we hit those, then convert to a fully commercial operation. So this is the model that we're working with, and that we are now proposing to apparel brands and manufacturers, because it takes a partnership. It takes both of them to be at the table to get this thing off the ground. And one of the proposals we have of this now are with one of the Fashion for Good partners at a new site that they have under construction. So, you know, everyone does start up a little differently, but this is the framework that we use to get these things together, and to keep trying them through trials, through working with customers and stakeholders to get closer to a repeatable and scalable business model. So just a few key points to wrap up about how to have a successful pilot. It's hard to do this with such a broad range of innovators and ideas and technologies, but generally I hope that these would be some things that might be helpful across the board. Number one, keep your partners engaged and informed. Make them a part of your team, because they are. Develop a deep understanding of customer operations and the environment that you're headed into. And focus on metrics, sustainability, and unit economics. If you get both of those right, your chances of getting a conversion or making it along that path to a sustainable business model will be dramatically increased. Thanks so much. That's the end of the presentation, and I would be very glad to take some questions. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing here, if I can figure that out.
Right. So yeah, thank you, Deepak. I think everyone probably got a lot out of that, and some questions have been coming in. But before the Q&A, I'd also like to introduce Emily from Fashion for Good. She's on the call as well. And she's an expert in traceability and wastewater, and she put a lot of this pilot together with Sea Change. So if you have any questions, you can also address them to her. Emily, would you like to say hi?
Hi everybody. I think I've probably met most of you before, but yeah, as Karan said, I was involved with facilitating this pilot with Deepak. So happy to answer any questions from the Fashion for Good side if you have those. Thanks.
Okay. So I'll start off with a few common questions that have come up as challenges with the South Asia team, and then we will go into the questions that have been sent in already. So one question that kept coming up during our first piloting workshop was that around negotiating a pilot agreement with a partner, especially with respect to exclusivity discussions. So what formats those take in terms of time and geography and likely concessions on your part, and how should like a startup be navigating that?
Great question. I don't have a solid answer, but I'll tell you some of my experience. I think if someone, we did have one opportunity actually that came up with exclusivity, and we said no to that. Looking back on that though, it's really hard to know if that was a good decision or not, or the right decision, or how things would have gone. The important thing with exclusivity is to put a price on it. And so, and to the extent that you can, limit it either by time, application, geography, or somewhere. Because if somebody wants, the whole shebang, global exclusivity for an unlimited period of time, they're effectively buying your company. And so put a price on it. There's nothing necessarily wrong with exclusivity. It's just that you need to understand, you need to put a price on it. That's my perspective on that. But also with Fashion for Good partners, and in this framework, I think that would be extremely unusual. And Emily can address that, but I think it's very unlikely within the Fashion for Good community and working with the partners in a format like this that would even come up.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I think again it totally depends on what the innovation is, because you have different degrees of exclusivity and different ways you can play it. So for another example from a raw materials innovator, if you have offtake, you can present an offtake menu with different degrees of exclusivity. So you can really try and tailor it so that you're the one with the steering wheel, basically. But I think it's important to be very smart about that kind of thing and really think about how you can engineer it.
Okay. So I think those are some very nice answers. I'll go to the next one, and then after that we can start moving with the participant questions. So this was around the post-pilot engagement, especially on how can you follow on with a pilot to drive further engagement with a partner. So given in this example, Arvind or any other pilot partner.
Sure. So the reason that that the partners buy into a pilot to begin with is because they see the potential of doing something that adds value, continuing value to their business. And so the way to actually get them involved is to say that this is going to be just the beginning of a beautiful relationship that will last forever. And hopefully it does. Obviously, you never know that going into it for certain, but your pilot and your relationship and the technology and the solution you offer should be done so in a way that assumes that there's going to be a relationship afterwards.
Right. Emily, anything to add on? Or I'll go to the next
No, I think that's good. Yeah, continue.
one. Cool. So our next question is actually starting with the participant questions now. So the first question is from Luciano. How was the initial proof of concept with Wrangler, and what were the main challenges to convince them?
That was amazing. That was actually, I think that was our first revenue. So that was very exciting. And it came up, I had no idea. I was actually giving a talk at a US Department of Energy event, and their VP, this is when I was still focused on oil and gas, and their VP of research was in the audience. And he came up to me afterwards, and he might be in this seminar right now. Sudhakar, are you there? All right, if he's there, he can say something. But he came up to me afterwards and he says, have you thought about trying this on apparel and textile wastewater? I said, well, what have you got? And so we kept talking, and he and his innovation team had the opportunity and resources to give it a try. And so, again, I came up with a proposal for the experiment and what it would take, and went from there.
Okay. Okay, right. So the next question was from Cedric. His first question was on why would you work with brands and not directly with manufacturers? And his second part to that would be what approach did you have to communicate these benefits of the value for each of these stakeholders and decision makers?
Wow. I'm gonna great questions. I'm gonna ask for that second part again. But why would we work with brands instead of the manufacturers? They're really tied together, but well, to be blunt, the brands are at the top of the value chain. In other words, they have a lot of money, and they more typically, Arvind is a little unusual because they're actually integrated, but most other companies are not. But typically the brands have sustainability initiatives and research initiatives. And so they actually have funding that is dedicated to innovation and research and identifying ways to sort of stand apart from their competition. And so that is one of the reasons why it's easier to engage a brand, is because they're looking for solutions. The manufacturers, of course, are looking for solutions and they need them, but they don't have as much outreach, I'll say, to find them. And in addition, the manufacturers are not where I am. I'm based here in the US. The manufacturers typically are in Southeast Asia, India, of course, South Asia, of course. And so, how to make that connection. Fashion for Good is in Amsterdam. So we just have to work with whoever's available that can talk and has the resources to put these solutions together. And they're all stakeholders in the solution. So, when our purchasing decisions get made, everyone's in the room. Really the key players and stakeholders across the whole supply chain. What again, Karan, was the second question there?
Yeah. So the second question was on what approach did you have to communicate the benefits of value for each of these decision makers, or like the stakeholders for the pilot?
It's different for each one, and because they play in different. They just have different they have different needs. And so like I walked through initially, my initial pitch to get the partners involved, I kind of promised everything, eliminate chemicals, zero discharge, microplastics, economics, just everything, the whole world. It was like fantastical and completely unrealistic. But the reason I did that was because I didn't really know what they wanted. And I probably could have done a little more research. I'm a little new to the industry as well, though. And so, of course, the sooner that you can develop that, very specific, focused value proposition, the better it is. And now my pitch is really, it is nothing like that. Because we've been in the field, I've developed this understanding of customer operations, and I know exactly what they need. And so now we're focused very specifically on sludge and eliminating that from their operations. It's not something that many people talk about. I don't think anyone else talks about sludge. But as I got into applying our technology and understanding their operations and their expenses, what we saw is that is an environmental and economic problem that is across the industry. And so now the value proposition that we offer is much more focused. So it really just depends on your understanding and of customer operations and knowing what they need.
And just to add to both of those points, with the first question, Cedric, that you had about why working brands and not directly with manufacturers, Deepak was working with Arvind as a manufacturer, and obviously, as Deepak has already mentioned, they have various different roles to play, and the power dynamics and structures are quite heterogeneous. So I think it was important to have both sets of stakeholders in there. As Deepak says, brands are quite important in terms of decision making, and manufacturers are really important in terms of testing. So it was great having Arvind there as the test facility. This also means that when you're structuring the pilot, it's really important to try and get the roles of each of the participants clear as much as you can from the beginning, because obviously in the field trial, the brands are not so much involved at that point. It's more it's Sea Change and Arvind were the ones that were really driving that. But then with regards to your second point, when you're talking about delivering the value to a brand, having that group of different stakeholders is really important when we were scoping down the pilot. So Deepak began with many different waste streams within the wastewater treatment process that he could treat. And with the input from all of those stakeholders, we were able to scope down that pilot into something that I think was the most valuable proposition that was available. So yeah, just to add on to Deepak's points there.
Okay, so the next question is from Edward from Hydrocotton. So he has two questions. I think this is in response to your earlier point on the problems you faced by being based in a different area. I know the logistics problems there. So he's asking if you could have nearshot your trial as a buffer against these local logistics, would you have done so? And alternatively, would it be better to scope more in terms of your budget and timeline and just go straight in?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. To be sure that I understand the question, could we have run it closer to home to make the trial more manageable? I think that's.
Yeah, Edward, would you like to elaborate on this?
Yeah, sorry. It's kind of been answered by the previous question, to be honest, by Luciano, when you were talking about the Wrangler project. I guess it's really partner dependent as well, because you don't really have the choice. If you've got the right partner for the end game, then you would obviously deploy right where they are.
As a startup, you have to do whatever you can within whatever resources you have to do it. But the other point of this is that our industry is incredibly varied from one region and one application to another. And actually, every factory that I have been into, and I haven't been to a whole lot, but I've been into quite a few, their operations are very different. Their chemistries are different. Their local regulatory issues or requirements are different. The cost structures, energy, water, utilities, labor are all different. And all of these have huge impact on the product that we offer and whether it could add value to an individual operation or not. And so getting and running these pilots, the one that we had here in India and the other one that I alluded to is in Taiwan. And we've been also exploring opportunities in Indonesia and Vietnam and other places as well. But getting out there into those sites is actually incredibly valuable. And so get to as many customer sites as you can, as quickly as you can is what I recommend. Yeah, we could save money by doing it in, close to home, but that may not be relevant to a real customer environment.
Thanks so much. It's a really good answer. Cheers.
All right. So next question is from Priya from GSP Enviro. So she's part of our program here in South Asia. So hers was 2 questions. So maybe first I'll do it one by one. So what was the scale of your pilot? And I think the second question is also tacked onto that is, how do you address the challenge of treating huge volumes of water?
Our pilot system processes between 6 to 10 tons per day, depending on the condition of the contaminants that are in the water, how much organic, how much salt, the initial temperatures, environmental conditions, fuel, a number of different factors. That might not seem like very much, and it's really not, especially for a place like Arvind, Gujarat, which processes 17,000 tons of water per day. So, scaling up, kind of like what I showed with our technology evolution, that first prototype we did, the one that we took to Texas only processed something like, maybe like, if it was less than 500 milliliters per minute. And so we had a lot of scaling to do along the way. The system that we have now, we found this balance of its capacity, and that's another reason why we focused on sludge. So there's only 1 ton of sludge per 1,000 tons of wastewater that's treated, which is part of the reason why we focused on that stream, is because we can hit it with the system that we have for most facilities. But then there's also technical challenges, and so we have designs for bigger systems if those are needed, but obviously we need funding to actually build those. And so we're trying to focus on finding a market and make sales and revenue with the system that we have. I hope that addresses your questions.
Yeah. All right. So the next question is from Linus from Circular System. So there are a bunch of questions. I'll just go one by one. Once you presented the proposal, how difficult was it to determine how much buy-in each partner should provide to be able to get the project off the ground? Was that clear?
Oh man, great question. So it's a negotiation, and it's tough. That is a really tough one. My background, I'm a scientist. I'm not, and though I had worked in corporate for a number of years before getting into this, corporate research and development scientists in large companies really don't usually have to sell. And so selling, you know, putting a value on something, asking for someone for money for it, and getting them to actually agree, close, and then making that transaction happen. There was a whole new set of skills that I had to figure out. I'm still figuring it out, but negotiating the pilot was part of that. So it's important to, as closely as you can, you know, define those endpoints. You know, what you want to accomplish in the trial that would, you know, that would add value to your startup, that, you know, the partners or stakeholders would find valuable, and put a price on it. And then what I did initially is try to get them to pay for all of it. That didn't work out for a number of reasons. Basically, they said no. Part of it has to do with their budget, and so they have certain budgets that the brands anyway, and the Fashion for Good partners, that they have, that they can commit to for innovation and sustainability, and what they'll kick into a trial. And really, I just kept pushing against those until I figured out like what they actually were, and then tried to figure out if I could find the funding to support the rest of what we needed to do. So I guess that's, you know, I'm glad to get into more details of that, because it's pretty involved, but you just have to figure out how to negotiate.
So the other two questions from him were, how did FFG support these negotiations? I think, Emily, maybe you can pitch in with this one.
Well, first of all, this is exactly part of what our job is, to help you with this, to support you guys with this sort of thing. And we have quite a good understanding of the priorities of our partners and how they respond to proposals. The first advice from my end when writing a proposal is to make it as succinct and clear as possible. It needs to be evident what would happen from day zero of that pilot onwards. So almost a day-by-day play of what the pilot would look like. That kind of detail is really helpful for us to try and formulate and structure the pilot proposal in a clear and accessible way. And then also, there needs to be very actionable next steps. So it needs to be obvious, if the partners are looking at this pilot proposal, what they can do, take it away and discuss it internally, what it is exactly that they're going to say internally to the people that make decisions on this front within their organizations. And also with regards to cost, it just needs to be explicitly clear what the value is to the partners for those costs. So what it is exactly that they're paying for. Yeah, and those are the most key things from our side, I think, when writing a proposal. But that is what, if you, basically we can help you scope that down and work it out so that it is packaged in the best way possible to present to the partners, so that from then on in, the negotiation becomes a bit easier, which we will also support you in as well.
Yeah, so another factor that I wanted to add in there. So yeah, Emily and Rohir were amazing, because when I was, and I encourage all of you to work very closely with your innovation advisor, and to pass stuff at them before taking it to the brands, because I'll just speak for myself. I had plenty of stupid ideas that are suggestions that I would say, hey, Emily, can we ask him for this? And she would very politely say, that might not be a good idea, or something like that. So they know, and they're incredibly helpful, and will help you navigate the relationships.
Right, and the last part of his question was on same around the pilot negotiation, but how would you do this process of negotiation differently next time?
I don't know. I mean, I'm doing it now. I mean, we're always. This is the thing about startup. We're always doing this. This should always be happening. If you're not negotiating something now, you're probably. You need to figure out how you're going to make something happen. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. So we are doing this now, and kind of where I wanted to leave that my presentation is that we're pursuing those next steps. So with a narrower, going from this, what we had was, originally structured as more of an experimental thing. Let's get this out in the field and try it. Now, taking that next step to saying, okay, we want to do this as a commercial installation. This is the value we offer. This is how we want to try it out, and then this is how much we'll charge you if we deliver these metrics and this value to your operation. The closer you can get to that for your pilot, obviously, the better. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay. So now I have a second question from Luciano from Gully on your initial promise to the brand partners, given your pilot proposal, and given that those initial sort of pitching didn't actually end up happening, how do you continue managing that relationship with partners? And any recommendation of to-dos and not to-dos in this situation?
Man, that's a tough one. I think they I think everyone will handle this differently. The important thing, I think, is to have trust and understanding with all the partners and stakeholders involved. They know you're innovating. I hope. Just be very clear about the state of the technology, and the state of your product, the state of your company, what you hope to achieve. Build a relationship with them, and have an open dialogue about what you hope to accomplish with them.
All right, that makes sense. So
just to add on to that as well, a good point from a learning from Deepak's experience, I think, is that he was very good. I know you presented this as part of the slides and what you should include in the bi-weekly or regular updates you have. Deepak was very, very good at providing very clear updates so that the partners were always informed of the status of the pilot. And I think that was a really good way to build trust and build those relationships.
right. So the next question is from Gilberto from SmartX. Did you need a pre-existing infrastructure to support these pilots, and who prepared this? He also has more questions, but I'll go to that after this.
That's a tough one. So our system requires some fuel, electricity, some space, and plumbing to get water to the system, somewhere to port the exhaust, and so we do need a certain amount of facility. As far as who provides that, we've done a couple of trials now, and each one has been different, and every place that we look at for commercial installation is different. The different facilities have different needs and space and capabilities, and so on the one hand, we just got to work with what we got. For example, in Taiwan, we didn't have, or they weren't. It would have been complicated and expensive to bring in natural gas, so we ended up having arrangement to have propane tanks regularly delivered and switched, which was a huge pain, but we do whatever it takes. Working at Arvind in Gujarat was interesting. They had a lot more flexibility there about being able to actually build and create the infrastructure that we needed for the trial, and so that was really nice. So it just depends on what site you're going into and what you got to do.
All right. So he had a follow-up to that question, but I think you sort of touched on it already, on the difference on this from country to country and how you can sort of scale the preparation process. If you want to elaborate on that, then otherwise I'll move on to the next one.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow the question. Could you repeat that?
So so his first question was on the pre-existing infrastructure, but also like, is that process of setting that up different from country to country, and how can you sort of shorten the time needed for that preparation process?
I think it's always a pain. I think probably the one thing that that I wish I could have done better, and this is something that we're preparing as we hope to make this to more commercial operation, is to actually have a person on the ground in each place, our own people. That I think is a very, very, very worthwhile investment, and would probably make things a lot easier for anything that we've done. And this is something we're investing in for our first commercial operation as well. So have someone on the ground wherever you're going to operate, your own person.
Okay. So the next two questions are both from Indra Water. First is from Abhijit, in terms of what the current status of Sea Change is, and in terms of what are your current like commercial deployments?
We don't have commercial deployments yet, but we have funding to build them, and so we're building the equipment now, and new machines incorporating everything that we learned in our pilot trials, and we are working with a number of brands and suppliers, including some that were involved with both of the trials, the pilots that we've done for the next step for commercial installation, which we hope to have done by the end of this year.
Right. Before I go on to Kunal's question, I'd like to highlight there's a bunch of fan mail coming in for you on the chat box.
Thank you.
So next question is from Kunal, also from Indra Water. In terms of what is your go-to impact story that usually connects more with the brands and manufacturers?
One thing that I've always that's worked for me to get to the next step of wherever I am, and there's always a next step. That's something I've seen. There's never like a finish line for this startup thing. Is to just take what I've got and then use that as kind of the stepping stone for whatever the next step is. So when I had that trial with Wrangler, I immediately took that to Fashion for Good and say, hey, I just did this trial with Wrangler. What can I do with you guys? Or when I had the trial in Taiwan, take that to Fashion for Good partners and say, hey, I got an agreement for this. Can I have an agreement with you? And so that's kind of just the way that I operate. And so that's still what I'm doing now to get to the next step for commercial installation.
Right. There's also one last question from Kunal. Could you talk more about the unit economics part, and is there a sweet spot of cost per kiloliters of treatment?
Unit economics is really important, but it's a little to put it into broader perspective, it'll be important for any of the innovators to figure out how they can add value to an operation, and how they're actually going to generate revenue to support their business. Okay. Having said that, for water specifically, it's really it's pretty challenging, because the competitors in water, they're very, very large companies, like Envisol, or larger like Suez or Veolia, or any of the big players. And they like to kind of put things in terms of, dollars per ton or gallon for whatever they're generating or treating, or their fuel or energy costs. And I tend to try and avoid those because the way that they do business is very different than a startup. They have huge overhead costs and budgets. They have big government contracts and relationships. They have a lot of other kind of background things that can support their business that kind of get not really incorporated into the unit economics. So if someone at a wastewater treatment plant says, "Oh, it's costing us 10 cents a ton to handle our sludge," that's just BS. That'd be because they're not really including all these other elements. And so that it's really important to go in and have an understanding of the operation and how you really add value. And then once you have that, we have that and are expanding on that, then we can go in and to the actual operator or general manager and make a real informed proposition about how we can add value. So our focus on sludge, most water treatment companies will not talk about that. They'll talk about things like, as you might be aware, membrane costs or chemicals or whatever they use to treat water, but the real cost ends up in the byproduct. So I hope that answers your question. But really, I don't think there's a sweet spot because everyone's operation is different, and it's important to understand what their needs are.
Okay. So we also have a question from Shikha from AltMat, who's another innovator here at South Asia. How does one make sure that a pilot leads to sales, especially when manufacturers insist on free pilots with no promise of timelines in some case?
A free pilot. You don't ever do anything for free. So you have to survive. And these pilots are incredibly expensive and challenging to operate. And it's a negotiation. Treat it as a negotiation, and before you go into it, I suggest know what your limits are. Map out things that actually my advisor taught me one approach, and there's probably others, but map out what would be the ideal scenario that you close with, what's acceptable, and then what's minimal for different categories like cost, labor, or whatever goes into your product, so that where you can draw the line. But free is pretty low, and I guess it's possible, but you'd have to get some kind of commitment and know your product well enough that there's some kind of guarantee that if you hit a certain performance metric, that there might be some kind of milestone payment or something. I don't know how you would structure that. So but free pilots, if it's maybe for something, some other product, like, I don't know, maybe they do free pilots for like software or something, where you say, or an app where you have like a fully developed product that your cost is already sunk. But with an industrial hardware pilot, running these is very expensive and labor intensive. It takes a lot of work. So it's really hard to pull that off for free.
Okay. So our next question is actually from Katrin. Katrin, would you like to say hi and probably ask your question? No. I guess.
Karan, you're doing that so well. So hi, first of all, but many thanks, Deepak, and congrats also on the Change Awards that you won.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
My question was related to, well, what kind of keeps everybody at this point in time up at night around the COVID-19 situation, and wanted to hear how you think this affects your business at this point in time, and also what you think, you know, might be long-term implications 12 months from now. Positive, you know, not affected, substantially affected, and what elements? Obviously this could be a discussion for an hour, but at least high level, what your perception is.
Great to hear from you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your joining and everything, all of your support along the way. Regarding the current crisis, is pretty bad. And it's hard for me to quite get my head around how bad it is. But we've had discussions ongoing with a number of partners and their suppliers throughout Southeast Asia, and we are focused mostly. I mean, there is one project we're discussing with Arvind, but with the others in the polyester and the synthetics and, you know, sportswear kind of stuff, that's in Taiwan, Vietnam, Indonesia, and they're struggling. The supply chain is struggling to keep things going. Orders are not going in, and my visits to potential supplier sites have come to at least a temporary halt. They're all trying to get things back online and survive, and trying to support each other, but it is definitely challenging. Longer term, being an entrepreneur, of course, I have to look at this as an opportunity. And so the industry, you know, maybe it'll have a crystal ball, but just have to keep being optimistic and figuring out how to make this happen. I do still think that our technology will offer value. And so we just have to be able to weather this situation until the supply chain gets moving again.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we have a question from Jeff from Cool. So his question is: have you ever hit a wall where you wanted to give up? And if so, what got you through and pushed you out of the bed to move forward? Nice question.
There's definitely times when it's, oh my goodness. There were so many things that went wrong with that trial. Oh my goodness. But it's not, how to say this, and so many opportunities that we've lost. You know, we celebrate the wins and the successes, and I think that's really important. We've been lucky and fortunate to have some big wins, but so many little ones along the way. Little ones, like being able to find a place to buy alcohol in Gujarat. Like just those little things that help keep us going. That just and so as often as you can on a daily basis, stay positive, celebrate the little wins, the little victories. I think that with your team, especially with Fashion for Good, with Emily, she'll help. And yeah, take time to recognize those little things, because that'll keep you going. And I never thought once about stopping this. I can't. Failure is absolutely not an option. I will hold on to this and make this happen if I do so with my dying breath. It's just not an option. And if you think it is, or might be, or feel that way about startup, it is hard. It is hard. It is the absolute hardest thing that I've ever done. There's plenty of other options, man. And so, and it's not for everyone. It's definitely tough. You're in fashion for good, so you probably got some things going for you. But no, failure is not an option.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, the next question is from Zach from Purify. So his was a follow-up to Shikha's question on the pilot. So if it's not going to be free, how do you negotiate what you offer to the customer, contributing funding to the pilot? And his addition to that is that they will probably want exclusivity, but what options are there to sort of give them without giving too much?
Oh man, you're negotiating with someone tough. They want it for free and they want exclusivity. That's nuts. You just have to, if someone's going to be like totally unreasonable, you just have to walk.
Hold on, this is Zach. I just want to clarify the question. It's not, the point was not that it'd be free and they want exclusivity. The point is they would pay for it. That's what you're shooting for. My point is if you're negotiating them paying for it, what do they want in return? They're going to want something that makes it valuable for them. Many times, right, exclusivity is one of the options that they're going to want. If they're going to put money in, they want to be the first person to bring it to market, or they want to be able to hold it. So I'm just wondering what the negotiation points are for that discussion.
Oh, there's many points. There's many points. Divide it up as many ways as you can. So I'm sorry, I'm not sure what your exact technology or solution is, but for example, for us, we came up with a way to purify water. So one of the first things we did is we put all of our intellectual property in a holding company, and we'll divide it up by industry. And so the startup, Sea Change Technologies, is actually only licensed for apparel and textiles. We've kept all the other applications separate. So for example, oil and gas, food, agriculture, chemical processing, whatever you have. Anyone who negotiates with Sea Change Technologies off the bat can't touch that. Or if they did, we would create another subsidiary to handle those other applications. It's an interesting discussion with Envisol because they play actually in many different industries, and so that comes into play. The other way that you could divide it is so top level by industry or application, then maybe by region. So maybe you say, okay, you can have exclusivity in India, but maybe not Taiwan, Indonesia, Bangladesh, or wherever. Another way you could do it is by time limited. So you can have exclusivity in this application in this region for this very limited duration. You could have exclusivity, but you need to keep paying revenue or licensing fees or have this many sales depending on, and if you're not hitting these targets, we get the license back or can explore other opportunities. So there's plenty of ways. Another option is to create a joint venture. So rather than licensing your technology or solution specifically to another entity, work with them as a partner to create a JV where both of you kick in a certain amount, and then the JV is responsible for commercialization. So there's a variety of different ways to negotiate and have that discussion and get to a win-win. But the important thing with that is to have trust with the folks that you're talking to, that they're not going to run with it. And then to understand what your limits are to the extent that you can. What are you willing to settle for? What would you be happy with? What would your team be happy with? I don't know if you have a board or shareholders, get guidance from them and your advisors as well. And Fashion for Good, of course, they will help you.
Right. So the next question is from Rui from Colorifix. I think this is in reference to piloting in multiple countries, but she wanted to understand what the most complex country would be to work in terms of bureaucracy and just sort of to put things in place.
Oh man, great question. We've been studying that. Currently we've got, so Fashion for Good can help with that somewhat. But what was great, actually, Emily got us a project with the Imperial College of London where they helped us explore that question a lot, looking at different markets and the challenges with different countries. And we've done that with a couple of different schools and organizations and MBA intern projects, trying to understand the needs in different parts of the market with this global industry. Every place is going to be different. This is something that I'm still learning about. I actually love Taiwan for our business. It's a very rule-following culture. Everything is just very transactional and transparent in terms of the rules that people have to follow to do business there. For our particular, they have high level of environmental regulation. And a high cost for waste disposal, and so all of those factors play into our favor. In India, we found to be very challenging from an economic perspective, as well as from government and regulation, and managing anything that goes in and out of the country. So, but our experience is pretty limited. But if any of those areas are ones that you're interested in learning more about, then maybe I'll follow up with you offline and we can share some stories and discussion about that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm moving over the question where Jeff asks you where you found the alcohol to one more question from Luciano from Cali. The typical B2B sales cycle for all proof of concept. Maybe Luciano, you want to elaborate on this, or?
Sure. Yeah, I'd just like to understand what is a typical timeline for a project like this.
It's really long, man. It's really long. It starts with building the relationship. I'd actually share with you, I'll follow up. We've started using a system called HubSpot. We use their free version, but it's a way to track B2B customers and monitor, relationships that happen as you move those along towards closing a deal. I think the typical sales cycle that people talk about for B2B sales is about 6 to 12 months. You can make that a lot longer for a startup because we're a lot less known to begin with, and typically the solution is novel, and so and the decision makers that you have are these large corporations with lots of internal departments that have to sign off on it, and so you need just a lot to build consensus within your target organization, and then have typically, well, for us, the size of the deal we're looking at, typically VP or C-level sign off to get those things approved. So it's pretty long.
Right. So yeah, I think so. We
and if I might add, also, it gets more complicated when you have multiple of those. So say when you have a brand and a supplier, to get multiple stakeholders within each of those aligned, and then between them, it's a pain.
So yeah, so we have a last question before I sort of wrap up. This is from Karen from Vienna Textile Lab. Was there a temptation to move your company over to another country because of all of these pilots, funding opportunities, and so on?
We definitely will have to, maybe not, or at least establish. So the way we're exploring that, we have to establish local operations in the target countries. That doesn't mean we need to set up a company there, but we could find a partner there that would support us, or that we could work through. And the closest we have with that are actually, for example, in India, we would be working through Endosol, or Arvin's wastewater treatment division, to support our business there, and which is why they're also a great partner to have in piloting and exploring the technology together. But we've also identified partners in Taiwan and Vietnam that would be our sort of representatives.
Right. Okay. I think all our questions are done. So I kind of want to say thank you so much, Deepak, for your time. And we've even kind of extended it a little bit. So thanks so much for all this. And I think all of the people who've joined us have also sent a lot of thank yous and a lot of things in the chats. So just one additional note for anyone who's joined and still has questions, you can mail them to us. And I think, Priyanka or Emily, if you want to say anything on closing, or then we can.
Just thank you so much, Deepak, and thank you all for some really good questions. And it's great to have such a nice, optimistic dialogue during this quite confusing time. So I think all of your enthusiasm is infectious.
Thanks. I hope so. Thanks all. If you please feel free to follow up. I'd love to work with you, and I know that this is challenging, and anything I can do to help, I'll be glad to help.
That's fantastic. If Deepak, if it's okay with you, we'll probably share your email address if anyone wants to reach out directly for any more questions.
Yes, please do.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. And it was wonderful to have this session. And thank you for all of the innovators who actually came on the session. And we should be planning a few more soon. All right. Stay safe. Stay indoors.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.